The Livonian War was fought for control of Old Livonia when the Tsardom of Russia faced off against a varying coalition of Denmark, Norway, the Kingdom of Sweden, the Union of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. During the period 1558 to 1578, Russia dominated the region with early military successes at Dorpat and Narva.Russian dissolution of the Livonian Confederation brought Poland-Lithuania into the conflict, while Sweden and Denmark both intervened between 1559 and 1561. Swedish Estonia was established despite constant invasion from Russia, and Frederick II of Denmark bought the old Bishopric of Ösel, Wiek, which he placed under the control of his brother Magnus of Holstein. Magnus attempted to expand his Livonian holdings to establish the Russian vassal state Kingdom of Livonia, which nominally existed until Magnus' defection in 1576. In 1576, Stefan Batory became King of Poland as well as Grand Duke of Lithuania, and turned the tide of the war with his successes between 1578 and 1581, including the joint Swedish-Polish-Lithuanian offensive at the Battle of Wenden. This was followed by an extended campaign through Russia, culminating in the long and difficult siege of Pskov, under the 1582 Truce of Zapolsky, which ended the war between Russia and Poland-Lithuania. Russia lost all its former holdings in Livonia and Polotsk to Poland-Lithuania. The following year, Sweden and Russia signed the Truce of Plasa, with Sweden gaining most of Ingria and northern Livonia while retaining the Duchy of Estonia. Prelude. Pre-war Livonia. By the mid-16th century, the economically prosperous Old Livonia had become a region organized into the decentralized and religiously divided Livonian Confederation. Its territories consisted of the Livonian branch of the Teutonic Order, the Prince-Bishoprics of Dorpat, Ösel, Wiek, as well as Courland, the Archbishopric of Riga and the city of Riga, together with Riga, the cities of Dorpat and Reval, along with the knightly estates, enjoyed privileges enabling them to act almost independently. The only common institutions of the Livonian estates were the regularly held common assemblies known as landtags, as well as a divided political administration. There were also persistent rivalries between the Archbishop of Riga and the Landmeister of the Order for hegemony. A schism had existed within the order since the Reformation had spread to Livonia in the 1520s. Although the transformation of the country into a Lutheran region was a gradual process, resisted by part of the order which to a varying degree remained sympathetic to Roman Catholicism. As war approached, Livonia had a weak administration subject to internal rivalries, lacked any powerful defenses or outside support, and was surrounded by monarchies pursuing expansionist policies. Robert I. Frost notes of the volatile region, racked with internal bickering and threatened by the political machinations of its neighbors, Livonia was in no state to resist an attack. The order's Landmeister and Gebirtiger, as well as the owners of Livonian estates, were all lesser nobles who guarded the privileges and influence by preventing the creation of a higher, more powerful noble class. Only the Archbishopric of Riga successfully overcame resistance of the lesser nobles. Wilhelm von Brandenburg was appointed as Archbishop of Riga and Christoph von Mecklenburg as his coadjutor, with the help of his brother Albert of Brandenburg-Ansbach, the former Prussian Hochmeister who had secularized the southern Teutonic Order state and in 1525 established himself as Duke in Prussia. Wilhelm and Christoph were to pursue Albert's interests in Livonia, among which was the establishment of a hereditary Livonian duchy styled after the Prussian model. At the same time, the order agitated for its its re-establishment in Prussia, opposed secularization and creation of a hereditary duchy, aspirations of Livonia's neighbors. By the time the Livonian War broke out, the Hanseatic League had already lost its monopoly on the profitable and prosperous Baltic Sea trade. While still involved and with increasing sales, it now shared the market with European mercenary fleets, most notably from the Dutch 17 provinces and France. The Hanseatic vessels were no match for contemporary warships, and since the League was unable to maintain a large navy because of a declining share of trade, its Livonian members Riga, Reval and trading partner Narva were left without suitable protection. The Danish navy, the most powerful in the Baltic Sea, controlled the entrance to the Baltic Sea, collected requisite tolls and held the strategically important Baltic Sea islands of Bornholm and Gotland. A long bar of Danish territories in the south and her lack of sufficient year-round ice-free ports severely limited Sweden's access to the Baltic trade. Nevertheless, the country prospered due to exports of timber, iron and most notably copper, coupled with the advantages of a growing navy and proximity to the Livonian ports across the narrow Gulf of Finland. Before the Livonian War, Sweden had sought expansion into Livonia, but the intervention of the Russian Tsar temporarily stalled these efforts through the Russo-Swedish War of 1554–1557, which culminated in the 1557 Treaty of Novgorod. Through its absorption of the principalities of Novgorod and Pskov, the Tsardom of Russia had become Livonia's eastern neighbor and grown strong after annexing the Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan. The conflict between Russia and the Western powers was exacerbated by Russia's isolation from sea trade. The new Novgorod port, built by Tsar Ivan on the eastern shore of the Narva River in 1550, was considered unsatisfactory on account of its shallow waters. Thereafter the Tsar demanded that the Livonian Confederation pay about 6,000 marks to keep the Bishopric of Dorpat, based on the claim that every adult male had paid Pskov 1 mark when it had been an independent state. The Livonians eventually promised to pay this sum to Ivan by 1557, but were sent from Moscow when they failed to do so, ending negotiations. Ivan continued to point out that the existence of the order required passive Russian support, and was quick to threaten use of military force if necessary. He aimed to establish a corridor between the Baltic and the new territories on the Caspian Sea because if Russia were to engage in open conflict with major Western powers, it would need imports of more sophisticated weaponry. The Polish king and Lithuanian Grand Duke Sigismund II Augustus was wary of Russian expansionist aspirations. Expansion of Russia into Livonia would have meant not only a stronger political rival but also loss of lucrative trade routes. Therefore, Sigismund supported his cousin Wilhelm von Brandenburg, Archbishop of Riga, in his conflicts with Wilhelm von Fürstenberg, the Livonian Order's Landmeister. Sigismund hoped that Livonia, just like the Duchy of Prussia under Duke Albert, would become a vassal state of Poland-Lithuania. With Wiek supporting Livonia, von Brandenburg had to largely rely on external allies. Among his few Livonian supporters was Land Marshal Jasper von Munster, with whom he planned an April 1556 attack on his opponents that would involve military aid from both Sigismund and Albert. However, Sigismund hesitated over participation in the action, fearing that it would leave the Kiev voivodeship exposed to a pending Russian attack. When von Fürstenberg learned of the plan, he led a force into the Archbishopric of Riga and in June 1556 captured the main strongholds of Kokenhusen and Ronneberg. Jasper von Munster fled to Lithuania, but von Brandenburg and Christoph von Mecklenburg were captured and detained at Ösel and Trident. This resulted in a diplomatic mission to petition for the release being dispatched by the Pomeranian dukes, the Danish king, Emperor Ferdinand I and the Estates of the Holy Roman Empire. A cross-party meeting in Lübeck to resolve the conflict was scheduled for the 1st of April 1557, but was cancelled due to quarrels between Sigismund and the Danish envoys. Sigismund used the killing of his envoy Lankai by the Landmeister's son as an excuse to invade the southern portion of Livonia with an army of around 80,000. He forced the competing parties in Livonia to reconcile at his camp in Pozval in September 1557. There they signed the Treaty of Pozval, which created a mutual defensive and offensive alliance with its primary target Russia, and provoked the Livonian War. 1558 to 1562. Dissolution of the Livonian Order. Russian invasion of Livonia. Ivan IV regarded the Livonian Confederation's approach to the Polish-Lithuanian Union for protection under the Treaty of Pozval as casus belli. In 1554, Livonia and Russia had signed a 15-year truce in which Livonia agreed not to enter into an alliance with Poland-Lithuania. In January 1558, Ivan reacted with the invasion of Livonia. The Russians were seen by local peasants as liberators from the German control of Livonia. Many Livonian fortresses surrendered without resistance, while Russian troops took Dorpat in May, Narva in July, and laid siege to Reval, reinforced by 1,200 Landsknechte, 100 gunners and ammunition from Germany. Livonian forces successfully retook Wesenberg along with a number of other fortresses. Although the Germans raided Russian territory, Dorpat, Narva and many lesser fortresses remained in Russian hands. The initial Russian advance was led by the Khan of Qasim of Shahayali, with two other Tatar princes at the head of a force that included Russian boyars, Tartar and Pomis cavalry as well as Cossacks, who at the time were mostly armed foot soldiers. Ivan gained further ground in campaigns during the years 1559 and 1560. In January 1559, Russian forces again invaded Livonia. A 6-month truce covering May to November was signed between Russia and Livonia while Russia fought in the Russo-Crimean Wars. Prompted by the Russian invasion, Livonia first unsuccessfully sought help from Emperor Ferdinand I, then turned to Poland-Lithuania. Landmeister von Fürstenberg fled to Poland-Lithuania to be replaced by Gotthard Kettler. In June 1559, the Estates of Livonia came under Polish-Lithuanian protection through the First Treaty of Vilnius. The Polish Sejm refused to agree to the treaty, believing it to be a matter affecting only the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In January 1560, Sigismund sent Ambassador Martin Volodkov to the court of Ivan in Moscow in an attempt to stop the Russian cavalry rampaging through rural Livonia. Russian successes followed similar patterns, featuring a multitude of small campaigns, with sieges where musketmen played a key role in destroying wooden defenses with effective artillery support. The Tsar's forces took important fortresses like Falin, yet lacked the means to gain the major cities of Riga, Reval and Or. The Livonian Knights suffered a disastrous defeat by the Russians at the Battle of Vargem in August 1560. Some historians believe the Russian nobility were split over the timing of the invasion of Livonia. Eric XIV, the new king of Sweden, turned down Kettler's requests for assistance, along with a similar request from Poland. Kettler turned to Sigismund for help. The weakened Livonian order was dissolved by the Second Treaty of Vilnius in 1561. Its lands were secularized as the Duchy of Livonia and Duchy of Courland and Semiglia and assigned to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Kettler became the first Duke of Courland, in doing so converting to Lutheranism. Included in the treaty was the Privilegium Sigismundi Augusta, by which Sigismund guaranteed the Livonian estates privileges including religious freedom with respect to the Augsburg Confession, the indigenate and continuation of the traditional German administration. The terms regarding religious freedom forbade any regulation of the Protestant order by religious or secular authorities. Some members of the Lithuanian nobility opposed growing Polish-Lithuanian union and offered the Lithuanian crown to Ivan IV. The Tsar publicly advertised this option, either because he took the offer seriously, or because he needed time to strengthen his Livonian troops. Throughout 1561, a Russo-Lithuanian truce was respected by both sides. Danish and Swedish interventions. In return for a loan and a guarantee of Danish protection, Bishop Johann von Munchausen signed a treaty on 26 September 1559 giving Frederick II of Denmark the right to nominate the Bishop of Ösel Wiek, an act which amounted to the sale of these territories for 30,000 thalers. Frederick II nominated his brother, Duke Magnus of Holstein, as bishop, who then took possession in April 1560. Less Danish efforts create more insecurity for Sweden. Denmark made another attempt to mediate a peace in the region. Magnus at once pursued his own interests, purchasing the Bishopric of Courland without Frederick's consent and trying to expand into Hærgen Weiland. This brought him into direct conflict with Erik. In 1561, Swedish forces arrived and the noble corporations of Hærgen Weiland and Jørgen yielded to Sweden to form the Duchy of Estonia. Reval similarly accepted Swedish rule. Denmark dominated the Baltic, and Sweden wished to challenge this by gaining territory on the eastern side of the Baltic. Doing so would help Sweden control the West's trade with Russia. This helped to precipitate the Northern 7 Years' War, since in 1561, Frederick II had already protested against Swedish presence in Reval, claiming historical rights relating to Danish Estonia. When Erik XIV's forces seized Panor in June 1562, his diplomats tried to arrange Swedish protection for Riga, which brought him into conflict with Sigismund. Sigismund maintained close relations with Erik XIV's brother, John, Duke of Finland, and in October 1562, John married Sigismund's sister, Catherine, thereby preventing her marrying Ivan IV. While Erik XIV had approved the marriage, he was upset when John lent Sigismund 120,000 thalers and received 7 Livonian castles as security. This incident led to John's capture and imprisonment in August 1563 on Erik XIV's behalf, whereupon Sigismund allied with Denmark and Lubeck against Erik XIV in October the same year, 1562 to 1570. The intervention of Denmark, Sweden and Poland-Lithuania into Livonia began a period of struggle for control of the Baltic, known contemporaneously as the Dominium Maris Baltici. While the initial war years were characterized by intensive fighting, a period of low-intensity warfare began in 1562 and lasted until 1570, when fighting once more intensified. Denmark, Sweden and to some extent Poland-Lithuania were occupied, with the Nordic 7 Years' War taking place in the western Baltic, but Livonia remained strategically important. In 1562, Denmark and Russia concluded the Treaty of Mojaisk, respecting each other's claims in Livonia. Livonia and maintaining amicable relations. In 1564, Sweden and Russia concluded a 7-year truce. Both Ivan IV and Eric XIV showed signs of mental disorder, with Ivan IV turning against part of the Tsardom's nobility and people with the oppression that began in 1565, leaving Russia in a state of political chaos and civil war. Russian war with Lithuania. When the Russo-Lithuanian truce expired in 1562, Ivan IV rejected Sigismund's offer of an extension. The Tsar had used the period of the truce to build up his forces in Livonia and invaded Lithuania. His army raided Vitebsk and, after a series of border clashes, took Polotsk in 1563. Lithuanian victories came at the Battle of Ula in 1564 and at Zazniki in 1567, a period of intermittent conflict between the two sides. Ivan continued to gain ground among the towns and villages of central Livonia but was held at the coast by Lithuania. The defeats of Ula and Zazniki, along with the defection of Andrei Kurbsky, led Ivan IV to move his capital to the Alexandrov Kremlin, while the perceived opposition against him was repressed by his oprichniki. A grand party of diplomats left Lithuania from Moscow in May 1566. Lithuania was prepared to split Livonia with Russia, with a view to a joint offensive to drive Sweden from the area. However, this was seen as a sign of weakness by Russian diplomats, who instead suggested that Russia take the whole of Livonia, including Riga, through the ceding of Courland in southern Livonia and Polotsk on the Lithuanian-Russian border. The transfer of Riga and the surrounding entrance to the river Dvina troubled the Lithuanians, since much of the trade depended on safe passage through it and they had already built fortifications to protect it. Ivan expanded his demands in July, calling for Ösel in addition to Dorpat and Narva. No agreement was forthcoming and a 10-day break was taken in negotiations, during which time various Russian meetings were held to discuss the issues at stake. Within the assembly, the church's representatives stressed the need to keep Riga, while the boyars were less keen on an overall peace with Lithuania, noting the danger posed by a joint Polish-Lithuanian state. Talks were then halted and hostilities resumed upon the ambassador's return to Lithuania. In 1569, the Treaty of Lublin unified Poland and Lithuania into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Duchy of Livonia, tied to Lithuania in real union since the Union of Grodno in 1566, came under Polish-Lithuanian joint sovereignty. In June 1570, a 3-year truce was signed with Russia. Sigmund II, the Commonwealth's first king, died in 1572, leaving the Polish throne with no clear successor for the first time since 1382, and thus began the first free election in Polish history. Some Lithuanian nobles, in an effort to retain Lithuanian autonomy, proposed a Russian candidate. Ivan, however, demanded the return of Kiev, an Orthodox coronation, and a hereditary monarchy in parallel to Russia's, with his son, Fedor, as king. The electorate rejected these demands and instead chose Henry of Valois, brother of King Charles IX of France. Russian war with Sweden. In 1564, Sweden and Russia agreed the Treaty of Dorpat, whereby Russia recognized Sweden's right to Reval and other castles, and Sweden accepted Russia's patrimony over the rest of Livonia. A 7-year truce was signed between Russia and Sweden in 1565. Eric XIV of Sweden was overthrown in 1568 after he killed several nobles in the Show murders of 1567, and was replaced by his half-brother John III. Both Russia and Sweden had other problems, and were keen to avoid an expensive escalation of the war in Livonia. Ivan IV had requested the delivery of John's wife, the Polish-Lithuanian Princess Catherine Jagiellonica, to Russia, since he had competed with John to marry into the Lithuanian-Polish royal family. In July 1569, John sent a party to Russia, led by Paul Juuson, Bishop of Ösel, which arrived in Novgorod in September, following the arrival in Moscow of the ambassadors sent to Sweden in 1567 by Ivan to retrieve Catherine. Ivan refused to meet with the party himself, forcing them to negotiate instead with the governor of Novgorod. The Tsar requested that Swedish envoys should greet the governor as the brother of the king, but Juuson refused to do so. The governor then ordered an attack on the Swedish party and that their clothes and money be taken. They be deprived of food and drink and be paraded naked through the streets. Although the Swedes were also to be moved to Moscow, fortunately for them, this occurred at the same time Ivan and his oprichniki were on the way to an assault on Novgorod. On his return to Moscow in May 1570, Ivan refused to meet the Swedish party, and with the signing of a 3-year truce in June 1570 with the Commonwealth, he no longer feared war with Poland-Lithuania. Russia considered the delivery of Catherine to be a precondition of any deal, and the Swedes agreed to meet in Novgorod to discuss the matter. According to Juuson, at the meeting the Russians demanded they abandon their claim to Reval, provide 200 or 300 cavalry when required, pay 10,000 thaler in direct compensation, surrender Finnish silver mines near the border with Russia, and allow the Tsar to style himself Lord of Sweden. The Swedish party left following an ultimatum from Ivan that Sweden should cede its territory in Livonia at the would-be war. Juuson was left behind while John rejected Ivan's demands, and war broke out anew. Impact of the Northern 7 Years' War. Quarrels between Denmark and Sweden had led to the Northern 7 Years' War in 1563, which ended in 1570 with the Treaty of Stettin. Primarily fought in western and southern Scandinavia, the war involved important naval battles fought in the Baltic. When Danish-held Varberg surrendered to Swedish forces in 1565, 150 Danish mercenaries escaped the subsequent massacre of their garrison by defecting to Sweden. Among them was Pontus de Lagarde, who became an important Swedish commander in the Livonian War thereafter. Livonia was also affected by the naval campaign of Danish Admiral Peter Eppermunk, who bombarded Swedish Reval from sea in July 1569. Under the Treaty of Stettin, Denmark became the supreme and dominating power in northern Europe, yet failed to restore the Kalmar Union. Unfavorable conditions for Sweden led to a series of conflicts that only ended with the Great Northern War in 1720. Sweden agreed to turn over her possessions in Livonia in return for a payment by Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II. However, Maximilian failed to pay the promised compensation, and thereby lost his influence on Baltic affairs. The terms of the treaty regarding Livonia were ignored, and thus the Livonian War continued. From Ivan's point of view, this merely enabled the powers involved to form an alliance against him. Now that they were no longer fighting each other,